Greetings, humans of the internet. Welcome once again to Bowtie Talks. I, of course, am your excellent host, Luke Johnson, coming to you from my undisclosed location in Midwest USA. And with Christmas just around the corner, and since last week's episode was about Santa, I thought that this week's episode should be about the foods of Christmas. Because nothing can be more polarizing than holiday food. Fruitcake, eggnog, gingerbread houses, gingerbread itself, and candy canes are probably some of the most polarizing foods there are. You either love them or you hate them. There is absolutely no in between. Did you know that an American military academy was almost brought to its knees because the cadets happened to make and drink eggnog? This and other news in just a moment. I thought I would begin by discussing first one of the most associated foods with Christmas. No, not fruitcake. I'm not discussing fruitcake. That stuff's horrible. No, instead, no, that rhyme was not intentional. Gingerbread may be one of the oldest known types of cake. Honey cakes flavored with ginger and other spices have been found in pharaohs' tombs in Egypt. And in fact, one of the earliest recipes for gingerbread can be found in 2400 BC in ancient Greece. Gingerbread would later make the leap into Europe when 11th century crusaders brought back ginger from the Middle East so the aristocrats' cooks might cook with it. Another possible origin story states that in the year 991, a bishop named Gregory Marker left the city of Nicopolis in the ancient kingdom of Pontus, which is now Turkey, after being chased out by the Persian army. He was tired and weary, so he made his way across Europe before arriving in a French village whose name I'm afraid to pronounce, so once again, instead I'm just going to spell it, called Gatinas. I'm going to say Get Nice, part of the Loire Valley region in France. And with permission from the local officials, he became a hermit, choosing to live close to the St. Martin La Salle Church in, again, afraid to pronounce it, so instead I'm just going to spell it, Baudrevillers, which was previously abandoned by monks. As a hermit, Gregor of Armenia, as he was called, as he was Armenian, fasted entirely every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. On Tuesday and Thursday, he ate 3 ounces of food after sunset. On Sunday, he did not fast, but ate very sparingly. He never ate meat or butter, but his chief food was lentils steeped in water and exposed to the heat of the sun. His rule was to eat as many as he could take in his left hand, according to the 1901 book, A Dictionary of Miracles, Imitative, Realistic, and Dogmatic, by Ebenezer Cobham Brewer. He became a bit of a holy man in the French countrysides, attracting, and I quote, bourgeoisie and peasants alike, whom he would offer his Eastern hospitality, finishing the meal with a cake that he made himself, according to a recipe from his country, compromising of honey and spices in the fashion of his faraway homeland in Armenia. And so there you have it, gingerbread had made its way to the West. And when it did hit the West, they made some changes. An early European recipe for gingerbread consisted of ground almonds, stale breadcrumbs, rose water, sugar, and of course ginger. The paste was then pressed into wooden molds. The carved wooden molds served as a kind of storyboard that told the news of the day, bearing the likeness of new kings, emperors, and queens, or religious symbols. The finished cookie would then possibly be decorated with edible gold paint for those who could afford it, that is, or flat white icing to bring out the details in relief. And it was also brought to Germany. The German term is Lebkuchen or Pfefferkuchen, which literally means pepper cake. And the term Lebkuchen is unspecified in the German language. It can mean Leben, life, or Leb, loaf, while the last term comes from the wide range of spices used in the product. And gingerbread was also once used as medicine. In the Elizabethan era, gingerbread was called a kind of cake or paste made to comfort the stomach. And in fact, during the 17th century, gingerbread cookies, which had just began to appear, were sold in monasteries, pharmacies, and town squares farmers markets, and, as I said before, it was thought to have medicinal properties. And early references from the Vadstena Abbey in Sweden talked about how the Swedish nuns were baking gingerbread to ease indigestion in 1444. And during the 16th century, the English also modified gingerbread by replacing the breadcrumbs with flour and adding eggs and sweeteners, which resulted in a lighter product. And in fact, the first gingerbread men have been credited to Queen Elizabeth I, who greatly surprised dignitaries when she offered them gingerbread men presented in their own likeness. And when English and immigrants came to this country during the 1700s, they brought with them gingerbread. And a new tradition began to develop building houses of gingerbread. It may have been inspired by when, in the early 1800s, the Brothers Grimm wrote about a witch's cottage made of candies and cookies in Hansel and Gretel. And also, George Washington's own mother is credited with one recipe for gingerbread. This would lead to the first American cookbook, which contained not one but 3 recipes for gingerbread, and the Americans made it in addition to the recipe by adding molasses. Molasses was a relatively cheap and accessible flavoring agent and sweetener with a very long shelf life, and so it would be perfect for shipping over to America so people could cook with it. I don't know about the rest of you, but all that talk about gingerbread is starting to make me thirsty, and if I had any, I might consider drinking a glass of eggnog. You know, that's always kind of stricken me funny as to who thought it'd be a good idea to mix together egg whites, egg yolks, cream, and occasionally some sort of spirit, whiskey, sherry, you know the like, and then drink it. Well, for its history, we once again have to look across the pond to that great oppressor, the deadbeat dad of the world. That's right, England. Man, if there's one thing that life has taught me, it's that, like death and taxes, the British are inevitable. Or, quote-unquote, borrowing tools from a neighbor, which you both know you will never give back. Sorry, Steve, the wrench is mine. Wait, what was I talking about? Oh, yes, the history of eggnog. While many culinary historians debate its lineage, most historians agree eggnog originated from an earlier medieval British drink called posset, which was a hot, milky, ale-like punch. By the 13th century, monks were known to drink a posset with eggs and figs. Milk, eggs, and sherry were foods strictly for the wealthy, so eggnog was often used in toasts to prosperity and good health. The drink became connected to Christmas when it hopped across the pond in the 1700s. American colonies were full of farms, also chickens and cows, and rum became cheaper, which later became a signature ingredient. And the drink would later be adapted by other countries. Mexico has rum pope, and Puerto Rico enjoys coquito, which adds coconut milk. However, the English name remains a mystery as to its etymology. Some say nog comes from noggin, meaning a wooden cup, or grog, a strong beer. However, by the late 18th century, the combined term eggnog stuck, and the drink would become a big hit with the founding fathers. George Washington even penned his own eggnog recipe. And when I say boozy, oh good lord, it looks like it'd be enough to incapacitate an entire army camp. And I quote, 1 quart cream, 1 quart milk, 1 dozen tablespoons sugar, 1 pint brandy, half pint rye whiskey, half pint Jamaica rum, quarter pint sherry. Mix liquor first, then separate yolks and whites of eggs. Add sugar to the beaten yolks, mix well. Add milk and cream, slowly beating. Beat the whites of eggs until stiff and fold slowly into mixture. Let set in cool place for several days, taste frequently. Wow, that has got to be one of the most alcoholic recipes I've ever seen. And it may have been this kind of boozy eggnog that the cadets of a well-known military academy were drinking when they almost brought the entire organization to its knees. Allow me to set the scene. The time is Christmas Eve, 1826. The place, the United States Military Academy at West Point, otherwise known just as West Point. Captain Allen Hitchcock had just turned in shortly before midnight. The Academy's superintendent, Colonel Sylvanus Thayer, had warned Hitchcock that the cadets inside his dormitory might attempt to throw their traditional Christmas Eve drinking party. Everything was quiet in the barracks at West Point as Thayer drifted to sleep snug in his bed inside the North Barracks. However, unknown to Hitchcock, a party had already started. Cadets had been secretly smuggling liquor into their barracks for days on end as Christmas steadfastly approached, which was risky because being caught with alcohol could have resulted in their expulsions because for an army man, Thayer ran a very tight ship. The colonel took charge of the academy in 1817. His strict discipline had transformed it from a school in disarray into an elite institution. A West Point graduate himself, Thayer prohibited everything from playing cards to tobacco to even novels. Man, talk about a killjoy. He sounds like the kind of guy who would disown his own children if they got tattoos. However, in a bit of leniency, the quote-unquote father of West Point had allowed alcohol on the 4th of July and Christmas. That changed, however, following a rowdy celebration on July 4th, 1825, when the cadets engaged in a snake dance and hoisted the school's commandant, William North, on their shoulders and carried him back to their barracks. There's outright ban on the possession of, and I quote, any spirituous or intoxicating liquor meant that the biggest party of 1826, the celebration of the country's 50th birthday on the 4th of July, remained unalcoholic. However, this did not stop some of the cadets from celebrating the Christmas tradition in which They delighted in holiday spirits by adding some spirits to the homemade eggnog. To prepare for their Yuletide drinking party, cadets snuck in gallons of whiskey, brandy, rum, and wine they had procured from the local liquor stores and perhaps from the West Point kitchen. Among these young men was Jefferson Davis, who from the start of his tenure at West Point in 1824 exhibited a fondness for booze and a rebellious streak that foreshadowed his later role as president of the Confederacy. During his first year at West Point, Davis had been caught at the notorious tavern run just off the campus by Benny Havens, whom future cadet Edgar Allan Poe would call the sole congenial soul in the entire godforsaken place. A court-martial would find Davis guilty, but his prior good conduct saved him from expulsion. Anyway, as I said, Davis was among the men at the party that night, which swelled in size as the night grew longer. At 4 a.m., the noise pouring through the floorboards was so loud that it awoke Hitchcock from his sleep. He left his room and wandered the halls to, and I quote, ascertain if there was any disorder in the barracks, and found 13 partying cadets in room number 5. This was the poorest of timings when a drunken Jefferson Davis burst through the doorway to his friends and said, "Put away the grog, Captain Hitchcock is coming." The captain, of course, was already there. Hitchcock arrested Davis, ordered him to his room, and then read the cadets the Riot Act, which declared any group of 12 or more to be unlawfully assembled. However, the cadets decided to wreak havoc against the killjoy. Dozens of cadets ran through the halls with swords, muskets, and bayonets. One even fired a pistol as Hitchcock attempted to break down a door. 2 superior officers were assaulted in the ensuing festivities, which Davis missed because he was either passed out in his room or had the good sense to stay there. When reveille was sounded at 6:05 a.m. on Christmas morning, the cadets who did not participate in the Eggnog riot, as it would later be known, awoke, well rested inside the South Barracks with military discipline. However, the North Barracks exhibited quite a hangover, to say the least. The disheveled dormitory sported broken windows, smashed furniture, banisters ripped from stairways, and shattered plates, dishes, and cups. The cadets who participated in it didn't look much better as dawn broke. Roughly 1/3 of the cadets were involved in this free-for-all. Because expelling all of them would have been a crippling blow to the academy, still in relative infancy, 22 of the cadets most deeply involved in the Eggnog riot, including Jefferson Davis, were placed under house arrest on the day after Christmas. Following weeks of investigation, court-martial proceedings began on January 26, 1827, against 19 cadets and 1 soldier. Davis, however, was spared, possibly for his immediate compliance with Hitchcock's orders, and eventually released from house arrest after 6-week confinement. For 1 month, a tribunal of professors and soldiers heard testimony from 167 witnesses, including from Cadet Robert E. Lee, who did not partake in any of the mischief, but spoke in defense of some of his classmates. The court-martials lasted until mid-March. All 19 defendants were found guilty and sentenced to be dismissed. However, 8 were saved by a recommendation of clemency, and 5 ended up graduating from West Point. 53 cadets received lesser punishments, which now brings us to one of my personal favorite Christmas treats, the candy cane. Now, hard candy sticks had been around since at least the 15th century, and it was these sort of sticks that were used by a German choir master to help keep children quiet during a church service. And he had them specifically bent into a shepherd's crook to represent Jesus. This is one possible origin story, however, it may not have very much evidence. But I like it, however, and so I'm sticking with it. It would later make an appearance in America in 1847 when a German immigrant named August Imgard used them as ornaments for his Christmas tree. He also introduced Christmas trees to the country. However, again, this is something that lacks a piece of evidence. However, I still like it. It is also somewhat up to debate. Some say it was a candy maker named Bob McCormick in the 1920s. McCormick's company, by the late 1950s, had become one of the world's largest peppermint candy cane producers. They sold about 500,000 candy canes per day at their peak. But it may be, well, that McCormick simply popularized the striping practice rather than invented it. One thing is for sure, however. This idea spread like wildfire as soon as a red and white stripe on the candy cane was near universal, as was the peppermint flavoring. And another thing Catholics can claim is the invention of the machine that would shape candy canes into the cane shape. Bob McCormick's brother-in-law, Father Gregory Keller, invented the Keller machine. It automatically put the crook in the candy cane. Before this, all candy canes had to be manually built when it was still soft coming off the assembly line, usually a wooden mold or something similar. McCormick was having trouble at the time because about 22% of the candy canes he produced along with his crew. Keller's machine automated this process, and shortly thereafter was perfected by Dick Driscoll and Jimmy Spratling, both of whom worked for Bob McCormick. This made it so the candy canes would come out perfect every time. And now for some bonus candy cane facts. The largest ever was made by candy shop owner Paul Ganelli in 2001. It measured in at 58 feet and 2¼ inches. In making this candy cane, Ganelli broke his own record, set 1 year previously with a 36-foot candy cane. 2 years before that, he also set the record at 16 feet. And with that, I now end you. Goodbye, God bless, and Merry Christmas.